All right. I want to start us off with sort of just a quick glimpse at sort of the way I came at this novel. And not that you need not that you need to read it the way that I read it, but I think it's helpful for you to know how I'm coming at this, because then you'll understand why I have certain conclusions that I have. But so I went into this thinking each of the books in this trilogy ends in an execution. The first one ends with Thomas More's, the second will end with Anne Boleyn's, anyway, and then the last one ends with Cromwell.
Spoiler alert.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering from at least in these first two books, Cromwell learns quite a bit from the process of what happens to the person who is executed. And so I'm curious, as we read through this book especially, what does Cromwell learn in this process, as he's going through what he's going to go through in this book? And then let me make sure that I say all the things that are on here. Quickly, I was going to say I think the thesis of the novel itself is what constitutes a fact. I think that's the sort of thesis of the whole trilogy, certainly. But in this one specifically, I think Cromwell teaches us what a fact is for him. And I'm really interested when we get more toward that part of the book. I'm really interested in those conversations. And you had started to say something. Not Anne, sorry, Allison.
When you made your initial statement about the process, I wasn't sure exactly. Am I mute?
Nope, we hear you.
Good. Happens to me a lot. I wasn't sure what you meant by the process.
Which process?
Didn't you just say something about the process of Cromwell dealing with the executions? That you learned something from that? I wasn't sure I understood what you were meant exactly.
Oh, I'm just saying that in each book, I think Cromwell learns from the process of executing the person who gets executed in the book. And so with Thomas More, I think he ends up understanding the mentality of a man who is unwilling to compromise even a little for his entire life. And I think that is sort of the important thing. And so one of the things that I would like to explore, so a conclusion I've come to, but I don't think it's the right conclusion, and I want to see if you all end up where I ended up at the end, is I think he learns, I think there's a learning that happens here. And not that the book is didactic in that way, but just I think that Cromwell starts to understand even more certainly Henry's psychology, but also human psychology in general, and how far he can take. Is somebody opening the largest Werther's candy?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
It's Phyllis.
It's thank you, Phyllis. Anyway, that's what did that answer your question, Allison?
So you're talking about insight into the psychology of the person who's about to be beheaded,
and how that to get inside the head of someone who's going to be headless. That's that's the sound of one hand clapping, I think. But I guess what I mean to say is there's a thing that I think he's going to learn in this book, and I want to see if you agree with it.
Okay.
Shona.
Hi again, everybody. So, I love this book. One thing that's really different about this book from Wolf Hall is how compressed it is. So you have a whole bunch of action that takes place in a very, very short space of time. And I think for me as a reader, it feels like, Cromwell set something in train that once it started, he cannot deviate from, right? And he has to see it through to the end, which will be good for him and not for other people. And so consequently, I started reading part 1 last Friday, and I finished the book on Sunday. So
Wow.
because I felt like the need to keep up with the pace of what's going on in Cromwell's life. So given that I think kind of speed and pace is an integral part of this book, how can, you can just tell me to shut up if I stray into other bits of the book. How are we going to do that? How are we going to deal with that? And 2, can we talk about, and it's okay, the answer is no, your thesis about whether or not Cromwell is the good guy? Because I've been reading this book with a new lens. So at some point I'd like to talk about that, not necessarily today, but at some point during this call, basically. So
yes,
because I've been thinking about it so much as I've been reading. So thank you.
Okay, so to give people fair warning, I had asked the question. I think what I had said is, what if Cromwell is actually the baddie? He's not the good guy at all. He's actually the worst person in the world. And that sort of Mantell had played a trick on us in a sense, or she has this joke because she is watching all of these people sort of laud this man who has so many people murdered. And we can argue time and place, certainly historiography, we can do that. But I mean, I can't say more because I don't want to spoil this book for people. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, Dom.
Yeah, you were talking about, you mentioned earlier, your question has to do with his understanding of the process. Implicit in that is the assumption that he's independent of the process, that he isn't part of the problem, so to speak. He was an active player in book 1, so I'm not quite sure. He is. He's a player, so he's therefore part of he is in the process. So maybe how the process affects him is what you're saying. I don't know.
Okay, that sounds like a semantical thing, and I'm
Okay.
clear with how you said it.
I maybe what Dom means is, at this time, all punishments were public. Not like nowadays when somebody is sentenced and whatever happens to them, we don't know. All the punishments were done in public, right?
No, I mean, in public,
There weren't public whippings. There weren't public they were private
okay, some things
and
were.
private. I thought things were done at the pillory. I thought things were done in public.
I don't want to. So here's what I'm worried about right now, Alicia, is that we're going to talk about something that happens later in the book. And if I answer if I correct what you're saying, I think
It's okay. It's okay. I'll mute myself.
No. You can talk. I just I don't think your premise is correct. All right. Anne Bennett.
Can you start, please, by explaining the first paragraph to me about the Falcons with his daughters' names? I found that very heart-pounding, and especially when it ended with something about came to earth with a pile of gore. That was a very dramatic way of of starting the book. And
Yes, she's talking
Yeah.
about-
I'd like you to elaborate on that, because it sort of floored me.
Do you mind if I ask a few other people to sort of give their opinion, then I'll sort of,
Sure. I mean,
yeah. What, does anybody want to talk about that opening paragraph? Do people, would it be gross if I just read it really quick so it's top of mind?
Mm,
Okay.
mm.
His children are falling from the sky. He watches from horseback, acres of England stretching behind him. They drop, gilt-winged, each with a blood-filled gaze. Grace Cromwell hovers in thin air. She is silent when she takes her prey, silent as she glides to his fist. But the sound she makes then, the rustle of feathers and the creak, the sigh and riffle of pinion, the small cluck cluck from her throat. These are sounds of recognition, intimate, daughterly, almost disapproving. Her breast is gore-streaked, and flesh clings to her claws. Yeah, that's a lot. So I will tell you, like literally the first, when the book came out and it was on my porch and I laid down to read, I thought it was a dream sequence because his daughters were falling from the sky. And then like I was disoriented and I loved that very much.
Mm.
The experience of that paragraph the first time is one that has stayed with me. Does anyone
There's
else have any?
also, there's a parallel, of course, with the start of Wolf Hall, where it starts with the moment that he is totally crushed by his father, and also with blood, and it's exactly the same start of the novel. So maybe when we come to the third novel, we will see that it will start also with the same violence that's in this, and also the death that's in it, and the birds that are in it, because those birds come by every time in her novels, of course.
Allison.
I think that's a good point, but it doesn't really address the question of why the Falcons, as described here, are with the names of his daughters, right?
Well, I think
this
it's
could have been.
pride.
There are angels. It's
Hmm?
kind of angels too. So there are always the angels. The daughter Grace, I think, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the daughters played an angel in Wolf Hall.
You're right.
Yeah.
No, that's all true, but
At
it's
Christmas.
just interesting and unexpected to me that he would conjoin that kind of imagery with the blood on the daughters. I mean, the Falcons are named for the daughters. So
Jeffrey,
it's,
you had,
it's
sorry.
certainly very attention-getting and dragging you into the story. You're wondering what is this about, even if you've read the first book. This opening takes you by surprise, grabs you.
Jeffrey.
Okay. So if we sort of think of the court as a place of high anxiety where everyone knows the stakes, everyone knows they could be outmaneuvered and sort of killed, then the image of like an alpha predator makes sense. And it's sort of like Cromwell, and he's sort of silent, very precise and premeditated and intentional about all of the violence that he's doing. And another thing to think about is this is sort of not common, but I think it's vital imagery, like vital in the sense of there's no more like obvious and in-your-face demonstration of life than the taking of another life. You know what I mean? Like having that power of being the predator rather than the prey.
Tom.
Yeah. Is there some
And then
sense
Shona.
his
I'm gonna, sorry,
daughter?
one quick second, sorry. I think the hand raising is not great. If you could type in the chat box, I will then
Oh.
be able to know, because I think I missed some people. But so go ahead, Tom, and then Shona.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's some sense in this paragraph of the shades of his daughters watching over him and keeping him from harm by dealing with his enemies.
I think that's a lovely interpretation that I would sign off on. And also just the fact that he wanted to educate his daughters. And so the way you educate a falcon is by training it to hunt better and better. So it's a parallel there, just with sort of this idea of this sort of spiritual continuity, not in a religious sense, but in the spirits of the daughters are carried through. And I believe it is in this chapter, I think Henry comments and says it's macabre that you've named the Falcons as your daughters. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to comment on. It's old Sir John Seymour who says that. So
Right.
Jane Seymour's father, the guy who'd been having an affair with his daughter-in-law, and he says, yeah, all these falcons named for dead women, don't they dishearten you? And Cromwell says, I'm never disheartened, Sir John, the world is too good for me, which is such a, bland, everything slides off me. So I mean, I love the arresting first paragraph, but I'm also wondering, what does Mantell think that this means to other people around Cromwell? Because the world hasn't been, I mean, in some respects, the world has been good to him, but this is one aspect in which it hasn't. His wife and 2 daughters all died of the sleeping sickness. How is he, why does he want to draw that to people's attention? Or, I mean, I guess I know nothing about Tudor falcon naming traditions, but if the other characters are commenting on it, then it seems like it was kind of a weird thing to do. Like, what would you think of a friend of yours who named their dog after a dead child? You would think that was troubling.
Yes.
Well,
I would talk to them first. I would just say maybe you would.
Yeah.
Phyllis. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, no, Phyllis. Yes, that's right.
Just that it's kind of foreshadowing. The bulk of the book is about hunting in a way.
Ooh.
oh yeah.
So having read the book more than the first, it's a little hard to discuss just the first chapter when you're, but and also somehow having the presence and blessing of these people that he loved, these women that he loved, as he deals with the women of the court. Gives him strength.
Janet.
Me?
Yeah. No, the other Janet. Yes.
Is that me? Okay. Well, the beginning of the book, I wonder if he's starting to feel he's gone so high now, and he's the thing with the daughters, the thing with I thought it was beautiful writing, but I didn't quite get it. But it says that, his daughters, they have nothing to fear. They're dead, they have nothing to fear, and they don't, and I wonder, they pity no one. And I wonder if that's what happens to him, Cromwell, that he's losing his, that we're starting to see him I don't know, getting, I've read all the books, and there's that fall that he doesn't even kind of see. And you kind of go, in this one, I kept going,
Icarus.
you know,
I think I know where you're going, and it's going to be tough to tell everyone else without giving away.
yeah, exactly. But you know, it's like, is he the bad guy? And I always think I go between, is he the really bad guy, or is he one of Henry's victims? You know,
Well,
that-
I think that those can be the same road.
yes,
There doesn't have to be separate paths for those. You can walk down the same. And I think the question was sort of, it's a silly question to say, is he the baddie? Like, are any of us? Well, I don't know. How many of you have executed under false pretense? Oh,
People
okay,
that
Jeff.
do
And,
anything.
Not recently.
yeah, but no, I just think no one is any one of their actions except Hitler and Jesus. And other than that, so since no one is really, I don't think you can distill fairly someone down to a thing. And but I also am just curious. I think what I'm revealing is I sort of went into the novels, or I realized I went into the novels, just assuming Cromwell is the protagonist, or he's the good guy. He's the protagonist. That doesn't mean he's good. It just means that we're following.
Okay.
But and then, you know, is it sort of naive of me to even think about it in such black and white terms as good and bad? But someone much more compromised than I think I originally gave him credit for. Shona. Oh wait, is there a hand raised that I did? Nope. Yes, Shona.
So I know what you mean. Like, it's not a silly question. It's a reductive, it's a binary question. Like, is he good or bad? It's not really, there's no answer to that. But I think for me, I mean, you know that most of people here knows that I'm like a huge Cromwell stan, and Cromwell in this book, and he's one of my favorite literary characters. But rereading this one with Mike's question echoing in my head was a different experience because you know, you have the Horner's effect and the halo effect, and I was looking for different things. So whether or not you think it's a silly question, I found it a really enlightening question in terms of it increasing my appreciation of like the depth and the subtlety of the novel. But you know, he's still my guy for now.
Oh, yeah. I was explaining to Jeff earlier today. So my Zach and I are rewatching Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. It was on HBO. Very satirical, very foul. But I also thought, is Cromwell kind of a Selina Meyer figure where, like, she's smart and she gets stuff done, but she's also corrupt in very interesting ways. And there's a scene where she bullies another senator that I could totally imagine Cromwell doing to someone else in exactly that way. And I don't know. So where was I going with that? Was I just bragging that I have HBO? Sometimes I do.
Okay, some of us do too.
No. Yeah, I just talked for a lot. Anybody else have a comment on? The other thing that I want to talk about, at least in chapter 1, is so we have we leave Wolf Hall with Catherine dead, with Wolsey dead, with Moore dead, and you would think Henry would be satisfied and pleased, and then we get to Wolf Hall and we get to bring up the bodies, and like Cromwell immediately knows that this could, like, he picks up probably before anyone else oh, this is probably going to happen. And he can start building that case. And the first rumble we get of the case against Anne Boleyn is, oh, sorry, no, Catherine's still alive. Sorry. She does die. Like, I'm not saying she's not alive now, but she is. So Catherine is dead, but not in the novel. She's not dead.
Okay.
That's an important distinction. Catherine erased. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. But I'm also going to let Phyllis talk. But I wanted to finish the thought that I had, which is, so Cromwell now knows that he needs to be sort of allowing all information to come in under the lens of Henry wants out of this. And Jane is the first one to sort of casually say, they're all in love with the Queen. Okay, Phyllis.
Well, the fact that Jonah said it was valuable to think in those terms of good or bad for the character, but when somebody's a historical character with, and the outcomes and very complex, can you ask a question like that? I mean, by asking a question like that, it puts light on the fact that you can't. I mean, to me, historic people, nobody's either all one or all another. It's just not how real life works, maybe in, a constructed novel with someone pulling the strings. But the fact that it's got to have some connection to the actual events, it just makes you realize that it's not one way or the other in real life ever. Like, was Henry a monster? Like, people think, oh, the monster Henry, but not really the way she has portrayed him for most of the book. Anyway, finished.
Yeah,
I'll go back to being mute.
No, Jeff.
Okay, I would like to talk about the scene where Rafe and Gregory are beating a man to death because he sort of insulted Gregory's dead sisters.
It's not an actual person.
Is it like an effigy? Is it a?
Yeah, it's a dummy they've made.
Oh, okay. All right. Because everyone was a little too nonchalant about it, so I will reread that. Thank you for clearing that up.
But that's actually also, just briefly, a passage that I had to read a couple of times to be like, really? What are they talking about here? I find this unclear.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong in asking the question you were starting to ask, because it's not. Yeah, that's the other thing is, I think Mantell is an amazing writer, but I also think she's a human being. And I think there are places where, as an amazing writer, she could have done maybe one step more amazing and been clear in some cases. And I think here in her mind, it probably seemed to work out. Oh, wait a minute, Fleur, I need to meet the cat behind you immediately. What is that cat's name? And will it be my friend? Fleur. There's a cat behind you. What if she doesn't know there's a cat behind her? Do you know there's a cat behind you?
Yes,
Yes.
there is a cat. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
She's sitting there. Yeah. Well, leave her.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all. I just love cats. So
her name is
right.
Uppie because it means lonely in Dutch or in English, but
All right.
well, never mind.
No,
It's not about the book.
anyway, so did you have something else you wanted to talk about, Jeff? Or was that just a question you had about the effigy?
I guess where I was going was Gregory has always been sort of the mild disappointment of Cromwell's kids, and he counts Rafe among his kids, and Rafe is probably the one he likes the most, who thinks is the most successful in Cromwell's terms. I think kind of what we're seeing here is Gregory trying to either imitate his father or gain favor by being like brutish and ruthless, which we don't think is really in Gregory's nature, but maybe he's trying it out anyway.
One of the things that I wonder if Cromwell actually loves Gregory as much as he loves everyone else. And he knows that the life he wants for Gregory is not the kind of life that he or Rafe or those, because I mean, Cromwell is realistic about the survival rate of people that close to the king, but then also oddly not aware that he is also a factor in that equation. But so I think he wants to protect Gregory, and he wants Gregory to get to be a gentleman. And so that's why. Anyway, that's my read on Gregory.
There's, I don't know if there's anybody waiting, but there's a quote, isn't there, the John Adams one about, I fight so that my son can study engineering, and he studies engineering so that his son can study poetry. And I wonder if that's what's going on with Cromwell.
No, I think that's a really good connection. Absolutely. Fleur, I also wanted to ask you, you'd said in the chat, first sign about what will happen to Boleyn is with Holbein. Can you talk more about that?
Well, you mentioned that starting the novel, you would think Henry is fine now because everyone he wanted dead is dead. But the trouble starts already with Anne, and you can see that in that sentence about Holbein, who made a portrait of her, and then she wasn't satisfied. And then the sentence is, I'm looking for it, but what could, well, I'm trying to loosely translate because I don't have real English text, but it's on page 15 of my book, but there's Anne, you couldn't satisfy her with anything at these times.
Yeah. Shona, I want to talk about what you just wrote, but so for those who don't have a Dutch edition, it's on page 5. No. Because you translated it really, really well. So the English translation is, Hans has joined them on the progress and made a drawing of Anne the Queen, but it did not please her. How do you please her these days? So she's already where she is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the irony, because that's not said already. You had it about literature and that it's so well written. But I'm a book reviewer and I read a lot of literature, but I've never read a book with so much irony and laughter and little guilty pleasures almost of the writer. You see that she is, by writing, she is totally enlightened about all kind of how do you call that, the words that do something magic almost, and then as a reader you can feel that, and then every paragraph almost has something to laugh about, or irony or sarcasm, and that's so brilliant. I think I've never seen that before in a novel.
It's a really, I think that she is I think the novel is a blacker comedy than I first appreciated it to be. I think I think my first time through, I was just in awe of how she captured so well the entire psychology of a person. And then the more I've read, the more, but this time, absolutely, you know, sort of that shift has happened. Jane Seymour as a comedy hero is absolutely what I think. I think that her deadpanness, I think that her, like, I just imagine her sort of flat, ironic delivery of a lot of her lines. Anyway, yeah, she is, I really like, I would like to spend more time with her.
Yeah.
Janet, you have your hand up.
Well, oh, that wonderful line and a trick. Oh, come back. And a trick of looking at men as if they represent an unpleasant surprise. That is that's such a wonderful line. Oh, you know. Oh. Poor Jane. Oh.
Oh, what do you mean scene about wool, Anne?
Well, there was, let's see if I can find it. It was the same scene where Cromwell said that he teaches his daughters as well as his son.
Yes, yes.
You know, with Seymour, page 12 and 13 of mine. Now they were talking about the sheep, the blackface sheep, and
Yes.
Francis Weston, a young courtier, says with a sneer, Master Cromwell used to be a shearsman. He wouldn't be wrong. There is so much there about, again, Cromwell's upbringing. He's not like us. He's from common stock, so to speak. And I think a lot of Cromwell's career is to go beyond his origins, and the power that he has is proof that to him that he's a different sort of person. And I remember it from Wolf Hall. People were constantly bringing up the fact that you know, he wasn't like us, and here too. And I think that is an important part of his makeup. And also in discussing whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, we're seeing this from his perspective. He's the narrator, so to speak. So, you know, everything is gilded with that. I think he's too complex a character to characterize him as one thing or another. Anyway.
The other thing about Cromwell's background that I think Mantell is interested in is people try to use it as a weapon against Cromwell. And Cromwell, we talked a little bit about this when we talked about Wolf Hall. I think men like Cromwell and Wolsey, who come from common stock and sort of rose through the ranks to achieve what they achieved, understand power better than a king who is born into it, because there's no fight, there's no struggle. It's already decided for you, just based on blood. If that's my mom, don't answer it because she is dead. other thing that I think is really interesting about Cromwell's background, and especially with Francis Weston, is how many of you have read Peter Pan? Did we read Peter Pan when we did the library group?
No.
Oh,
There's a fascinating moment in Peter Pan where we are introduced to Captain Hook.
mhm.
And in that introduction, Barry, who understands his audience is going to be children, knows what children are thinking and says, let's look at that hook in action, and makes Captain Hook disembowel a pirate behind him.
Mhm.
And this is this fascinating wish fulfillment that happens in a lot of art going forward. You see this especially, especially I would say in horror stories or violent stories, that when we find out that there is something terrible that's possible, we need to also see that terrible thing happen. And so we have to have characters that we feel we can sacrifice with good moral reason for that sacrifice. And Francis Weston, this is not spoiling anything because you should know this history. Francis Weston is one of the men who is going to be executed for adultery with the Queen. And so I wonder if Cromwell is paying a lot of attention to this because he wants to justify his actions that he is going to take against Weston. Like, I think it's a much more complicated relationship between those two in that moment than I had originally thought. And Allison, you said, just say what you said. I don't need to read. Allison, what were you? Oh, just say that? Okay, fine. Cromwell's background gives him more insight into how to gain and use power better than someone who has grown up in the nobility. Sorry, that's the other thing that is really useful to know, but as Jeff sort of mentioned, and I think it's a good way to read the books, he kept himself historically ignorant. And I think, I think that's good. The book should be able to stand whether you know the history or you don't know the history. Like, that should not change whether the book is good. But it's sort of unprecedented what Henry is doing. Henry is raising a lot of common people. Catherine is of undoubted royal blood. Both of her parents were monarchs in their own right, and then together they were monarchs. So they're a weird mathematical equation of monarchs together. And so that first marriage between Henry and Catherine of Aragon is fantastic and very royal. The marriage to Anne Boleyn is a marriage to a commoner, and the marriage to Jane Seymour is a marriage to a commoner. So what Henry is not doing, what's attempted with the marriage to Anne of Cleves, and then what they just abandoned altogether, is Henry is marrying stock that is not royal. It's one of the reasons why the Poles are so cranky with Henry, because they feel the Tudors have no business being on the throne at all. And it can't be, we talked about this in Wolf Hall and we can talk about it here, it can't be overemphasized enough how new the Tudor line is. Henry is the second Tudor to sit on the throne. And he is not having a good time with heirs that live. So, Phyllis said, same with Wolsey. Yes. The transaction or the negotiating that happens once Cromwell recognizes that Henry is interested in Jane, and he makes Jane's family aware of that interest. The negotiating about what she needed to do, sort of how to lure Henry like a fish in order to get him in an exciting way. Because Henry, y'all know that cats are, like they need to fight before they have mom and dad time, is the way I feel comfortable saying it. Like there's a word for it, but they need that violence. And so anyway, yes, a mistress and a good mistress, there's a difference. So are you raising your hand, Anne, or just
No, scratch.
Okay. Marion wants to know, do you think England would have stayed Catholic if Catherine produced male heirs? Absolutely it would have. But I would say 90% would have, 10% might not. And the 10% that might not is only because the idea of praemunire, which is a foreign, like a sort of having two kings within a country, because the Pope would be considered as authoritative as the king. So that idea that England wanted to get out of that relationship is that, okay, Shona, go ahead.
Just say, I don't think England would have stayed Catholic. I think they might have ended up with a different establishment church. But if you look at, say Scotland in a similar period, so Scotland at the time of the novels was a Catholic nation with a Catholic monarch. But overall, over the course of time, the Lutheran reforms and the rise of Protestantism and the decline of this desire for like the intercessionary body between an individual human and the deity, I think would have happened in England as well. Like I don't see England have stayed as a majority Catholic country. Scotland's no longer a majority Catholic country, and I think there would have been like, I'm sure somebody must have written a novel about it, like Fatherland, about what happens if Catherine has a boy. But I don't think, I think overall the you know, as Protestantism swept through Europe, I think it would have made it to England. I think one of the things, incidentally, that's really interesting for like a British person reading these books is how British people are taught, and I don't want to draw any parallels with your own delightful nation, but are taught that Britain is very central to world history and world events and extremely important. And reading this book at the time, you know, the sort of the most classically English time of, you know, Henry VIII, to see that it was seen in Europe as this like dark, rainy, dreary country full of savages is like really is kind of a bit of a slap in the face. So that was a bit of a sidebar.
Alicia. We can't hear you if you've been speaking for a while. Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I had my earbuds on, so that must be, maybe there's something wrong with the microphone. Okay. I don't think England would have remained Catholic because none of the Nordic countries or Low Countries remained Catholic. The Dutch went Protestant, the Swedes went Protestant, the Danes went Protestant. It's only the Latin races, the French, the Belgians, the Spanish, the Italians, who remain Catholic. So yes, unless somebody can come up with another country please contradict me, but
Bavaria,
beg pardon?
Bavaria, which is Catholic to this day.
Yep.
That, yeah, Germany isn't a country at this time.
Ireland.
That's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Is it? That's weird. I've never heard about the Troubles. But yeah, no, Ireland does stay.
My connection.
What I wonder is, so here's what I would say. I would say that England would stay Catholic as long as it benefited. I think eventually, because Reformation, so I'm changing my entire answer, by the way. Because of the rise of Lutheranism and evangelicalism in on the continent, I think once England got all they needed out of that papal association, which is going down, like it's a steadily this.
It's eroding.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, they would have eventually said, let's stop sending money to Rome and let's these evangelicals have an interesting idea. Go ahead, Ann Asher.
Yeah, well, Henry had pretty expensive tastes, and that money was going to the monasteries. He wanted it.
Say that one more time.
Well, Henry, I think, begrudged the money that was going to Rome anyway. He wanted it for himself because he had very expensive tastes.
Well, I think one of the things that Mantell is saying about Henry is Henry doesn't know that Henry doesn't have the money. It's everybody else knows this. So Henry has expensive tastes, but I don't think he has any idea what it takes to keep him in those expensive tastes. Yes, wars are not affordable things, is what Cromwell keeps telling him. Yeah, and there's that question that I mentioned, or the point that I bring up in the notes that I sent, if you looked at those, which is the line, England has had 50 years of peace. It's the Tudor promise, but they're really, like, it's a specific kind of peace that we are talking on. Where was I going with that? I do not know at this point. It happens. But, well, it happens in a couple places. It happens early in Wolf Hall, Jeff, about the wars are not, oh, sorry, Shona. Not Robin. Jesus.
And there's a great line where Henry says, you know, should I stay at home and, I don't know, be wrapped in cotton wool or something? And Cromwell's like, well, for fiscal purposes, that would be ideal.
Yes.
My favorite Cromwell lines.
Yes.
And in this book, I think Chapuis says, you know, if you had been in charge of the treasury 5 years ago, it would be very fine. Where else did I want to? So one of the other things that would the USA exist if England stayed Catholic? Oh, absolutely. Because are you kidding? If England stayed Catholic, those pilgrims are still going to be cranky about Catholicism.
They're still going to have to leave.
Yeah, they're still going to, yeah, they have to get out.
Get on that boat.
In fact, it could be that even more colonizers would show up on American shore if England
We all
stayed.
speak French, you know.
Oh, that's
Or Spanish.
Think of that. All down the Mississippi, all the, you know.
Right.
the French colonies.
One of the things that I am also interested in discussing before we say goodnight to each other is, well, sorry, there are two questions that I wanted to talk about. One is, what do you think about the idea that history has often characterized Cromwell's actions as just carrying out the will of the king? And that's sort of a way to excuse him somewhat from moral responsibility. But what if it turns out it truly is just a grudge that he has against these specific men? And it's a bonus. Like, he can use these guys to accomplish the thing Henry wants, and at the same time serve the king. Like, it's sort of this incredibly economical revenge fantasy for Cromwell. You're going to want that back, Jeff. You actually need that to live. You can't not have your heart. You should. Okay.
It's safer there.
Fair enough. So what do you think about this just being a grudge rather than Jeff?
I tend to think the entire court and this whole system of government is like irretrievably corrupt. So I think any good someone does is sort of incidental to the very nefarious system they've set up.
Phyllis.
Yes, it seems all along that I thought it was a grudge, because he goes after all the people who were in that play, in that, you know, the thing that they did, the Christmas revel thing, where the people mocked Wolsey right after he died, when it was the most raw for Cromwell, and he, you know, made specific points to see who it was under the costumes, and he forgot not. You know, he kept it. And when the opportunity came up, he orchestrated the revenge. Not that, I mean, because it seems pretty extreme. It was in aid of what Henry wanted, but he stuck in maybe 5 or 6 other people.
There's that wonderful moment in Wolf Hall where, oh, my train of thought just left me.
When he lets Smeaton know he speaks Flemish?
Well, that happens in this book.
Okay.
It's not in Wolf Hall. I forgot. Never mind. It'll come back to me another time, and I'll write about it.
Well, he does bring up the charade or the mask. He does bring it up with them. It's like he does tell them of which crime they are going to be judged. You know, he does.
But we need to be careful. So that hasn't happened yet. So I don't want to talk about that, because that happens later. So let's be mindful of what happens in this book. So all we know in this first chapter is that the Queen has admirers, that if you want to know anyone's secret, you should go to Mark, because he's always with them. You know that Jane, it's tough to know if Jane is aware of what she's doing. Does she know that what she is saying can be used against Anne, or I don't know. Any thoughts about Jane's agency?
Jane-
Shona. Oh,
Someone else.
Shona, and then Phyllis, and then whoever started talking, if you could write your name in the chat, I will call on you.
Sorry, I forgot to do that. But just quickly, we're talking about Jane Rochefort here, right? And what we do know about her is that she was really complicit in the downfall of one of Henry's later wives, which I think probably changes the way we might think about her behavior here. Or
no, I meant Jane Seymour.
Oh, you mean Jane Seymour? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really have any thoughts about that apart from that she's hilarious.
Well, I think Jane Seymour is extremely smart and just very understated. And so whatever she does is not mindless. I don't know that she's calculating like Anne Boleyn is calculating, but I think she's just like the super aware person seeing how things are going and just keeping her own counsel and maintaining the facade of being this extremely, maybe almost dumb person, you know, little mentally not too there, but I think and that's why she intrigues Cromwell, because he picks up on that. He chose his wife for that reason, because he knew how insightful she really was, and he sees that in Jane. And I love the whole business with the blue sleeves. I think that's
And wait, was it Anne Bennett who said she had?
Yeah.
Yeah, Anne Bennett. Sorry. Yes.
On a hand. Well, I was thinking about Cromwell knew that Henry needed to move on maritally, and I think yes, he had a grudge against these men because of the play, but I think he probably figured, you know, everybody's got something dark in their past, and you know, well, maybe they didn't do this, but they did something else. I don't think he no, he didn't regard them as innocent victims, even though they might not have done what he was going to accuse them of.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you know, I find Jane very intriguing, and Cromwell's relationship with her, because in Wolf Hall, he was quite taken with her in a sort of a subtle way. He really liked her. And yet at the end of chapter 1, section 1, he said, you know, he has whatever attraction he had for her has faded. Is it because Henry is interested in her?
That's my sense, that he realizes this is now a non-starter. There's no way that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish.
I would agree.
Allison. Oh, we can't hear you for some reason.
I would like very much to think that Jane is bright.
You're very, very faint. We can't hear you.
I don't understand what the problem is. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
There is anybody else who hears her at full volume?
I do.
I don't think any of us do.
Funny. Okay, I'm trying to speak really loud. Okay, well, since I know that Cromwell is interested in Jane, that certainly supports the idea that she's bright, because you would think that would be something he would be interested in and appreciate. But I would be happy if people could point to some things in the text itself that actually suggest that, because she comes across, you know, like you said, very low-keyed, so low-keyed that I don't feel I have a really good fix on her.
There's a great moment in Wolf Hall where she talks to Cromwell and she tells him, he asks her if she's a spy, and she says yes. And then she says, I really wish you would have more conversations in English because I don't know the other languages. Like, she's very open about her limitations, which I find, I hear them in my head less as this sort of shame-filled apology and more of, yeah, can you just make my job easier? I don't know this. Like, I think that there's more going on with her than we've appreciated. And there's more going on with her than other people except Cromwell appreciated.
Well, certainly more than her family gives her credit for. I think that's clear. But then
Well,
it
nobody
seems
could be meaner to their family than Thomas More. Like, that's, Thomas More is the meanest person to his family to have ever lived. And I'm including Joan Crawford.
No, I mean well, the Seymour men don't seem to have a very good reputation with their treatment of women generally, and they certainly, I wouldn't give them any points about how they treat Jane or what, how they conceive of Jane.
Yes.
I think it's very funny how they treat Jane. It's like, oh, how old is she? I don't know. Is she here? Is she? Which tells you a lot more about the Seymour men than it does about Jane. But
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Marion, I see your hand up, please.
In terms of Jane, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Anne, because I think the women were just a means to the ends for the families. The women could marry into whatever line and uplift the family, but I don't think they were valued for themselves. And I think Jane is probably considered the same way as Anne was considered by her family.
You know what's interesting about that, Marion, is there's that powerful line in Wolf Hall where Anne says, I used to be appreciated, but now I'm valued. And I think you get the sense that Jane doesn't carry any illusions about her value. I think Anne went in thinking, I am now incredibly valuable. And she learns with a terrifying quickness that she is not. But Jane, I think, is smart enough to recognize that that's not her station. Anne Bennett.
And I thought that line when Anne said that was because she was pregnant.
Right.
Okay, yeah, you were right.
Valuable because I'm going to produce an heir.
That's a good correction. Forget everything I said. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, I think one thing that you have to bear in mind is that Jane has probably been watching very carefully how Anne has fared, and that may influence how she views her role and herself in all of this.
All right, I'm gonna bring us to a close. We'll talk more again in 2 weeks, but the one thing that I want us to think about going forward, or maybe a reading I would like you to consider when we discuss these, is what if Anne isn't calculating? Because again, we're seeing the Anne that Cromwell knows. And that's he's going to interpret her. He's going to translate her. She's going to be a different person in his eyes. And I think it's really important for us as readers to recognize that we're being told about someone not in their own words. So when we things that we might think are calculating, or things that might be presented to us as evidence of Anne's misconduct, I would just say take a moment and look at it, do a 360 with it, and see if it keeps its shape all the way around, or is there maybe a way that this isn't the way that Tom is seeing it. I call him Tom. Yes. I don't know if people see what Fleur put in, but how Mantell looks at women. So one thing I realized, this book does not pass the Bechdel test, but there are never two women alone who talk to each other about anything other than a man. But yeah, I think sort of what Mantell is doing with her fiction, with the women in it, is really, really, really useful to see. Yes, tries to get Moore to be nicer to me. Boy, does he, and boy, does Thomas More not take him up on that offer.
Right.
All right. I will talk with you again Wednesday week. We will discuss up through chapter 2. This was really fantastic. Thank you very much for spending your night with me. I really enjoyed seeing you all again and getting back on the Cromwell track.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.